The first thing I smelled wasn't smoke. It was wet insulation and burned pine, that sharp, bitter smell that sticks in the back of your throat and makes you realize something permanent just happened. I was standing in what used to be my kitchen, staring at a cast iron skillet half buried under black ash, and all I could think was 20 years on the federal bench, hundreds of corruption cases, cartel money laundering, crooked politicians, judges taking bribes. And somehow the most vicious people I'd ever dealt with were running a homeowners association in northern Montana. Funny how life works like that. The sheriff was still outside talking to fire investigators while my neighbors stood in little clusters pretending not to stare at me, pretending not to whisper. Some looked guilty. Some looked scared. A few looked satisfied. But one person was missing. Celeste Holloway, HOA president, real estate broker, self-appointed queen of Bitterroot Ridge Estates. The woman who'd spent the last year trying to erase me from this valley. 3 months later, she'd be standing in federal court, crying so hard mascara ran down her neck, while prosecutors read off conspiracy and arson charges. But that morning, standing in the ashes of my home, I didn't know any of that yet. I just knew somebody wanted me gone badly enough to light a match. If you've ever dealt with HOA insanity before, leave your story in the comments, because after what happened to me, trust me, I don't think most people understand how ugly these things can really get. My name's Elliot Mercer. I'm 61 years old, retired now, though for most of my adult life people stood when I entered courtroom. I served 19 years as a federal judge out of Denver before finally deciding I was tired of suits, tired of politics, tired of looking at human greed every single day like it was my full-time profession. After my wife passed from ovarian cancer, the city started feeling loud in a way I can't really explain. Empty too. Every restaurant reminded me of her. Every street corner had a memory attached to it. So I bought back my grandfather's old property outside a tiny mountain town called Alder Creek. Population maybe 1,200 if you counted dogs and drifters. The cabin sat on 37 acres surrounded by pine trees and open sky. The kind of place where mornings smelled like cold dirt and cedarwood. I rebuilt most of it myself. Put solar panels on the roof, restored the old barn, planted a massive vegetable garden my late wife would have loved. Honestly, I thought I was building a peaceful ending for myself. Then Celeste moved in. You ever meet somebody who smiles with every tooth in their mouth except their eyes? That was Celeste Holloway. Mid-50s, blonde hair stiff from salon spray, always dressed like she expected photographers to jump out of the bushes at any moment. She drove a white Range Rover that somehow never got dusty despite living in the mountains. And she wore expensive perfume so strong I could smell it before she even stepped out of the vehicle. The first time she came to my property, I was repairing fencing near the east pasture. She climbed out wearing knee-high boots that cost more than my first truck and looked around my land like she was inspecting a prison yard. "Mr. Mercer," she said, smiling wide, "you're the last unresolved property issue in Bitterroot Ridge." I remember laughing because I genuinely thought she was joking. "Ma'am," I said, leaning against the fence post, "this land's been in my family since Eisenhower was president." Her smile twitched just slightly. That may be true, but communities evolve. Standards evolve. We all have to cooperate for the greater good. Now, when you spend 2 decades sentencing corrupt people, you learn to hear hidden meaning inside polite language. And underneath all her polished realtor charm, I heard immediately, control. She wasn't talking about community. She was talking about ownership. What I didn't know then was that a luxury development company called Silver Peak Holdings had already offered her a private commission deal worth nearly $500,000 if she could convince me to sell my acreage. My land sat directly between 2 planned expansion phases. Without my property, their project stalled. With it, they'd make millions. And Celeste wanted her cut. The harassment started small. Anonymous zoning complaints. Fake environmental concerns. Surprise inspections from county officials who always left confused because everything on my property was perfectly legal. Then came the HOA notices despite the fact my property legally existed outside their authority. One morning, I opened my mailbox and found a violation warning because my barn paint color was considered visually disruptive to neighborhood harmony. My barn was older than the HOA itself. I remember standing there holding that ridiculous letter while my coffee went cold in my hand, thinking, these people really don't understand who they're playing with. But even then, I still believed it would calm down eventually. That was my mistake, because people like Celeste don't stop when you resist them. They escalate. And about 6 weeks later, during my granddaughter's birthday barbecue, she made her first real move. And that's when I realized this woman wasn't just petty. She was dangerous. My granddaughter Avery had just turned 9 that afternoon, and for a few hours the world actually felt normal again. Kids were running across the pasture chasing each other with squirt guns. Burgers were smoking on the grill. Country music drifted through the yard from an old speaker balanced on the porch rail. Honestly, it was the happiest I'd felt since my wife died. My daughter Lauren was sitting beside me under the cottonwoods sipping lemonade when she leaned closer and said quietly, "Dad, you look lighter out here." I remember smiling at that because she was right. For the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling grief sitting on my chest like a sack of wet cement. Then the process server showed up. Nothing kills the mood at a child's birthday party faster than a man in a cheap gray suit carrying legal documents like he's delivering a death sentence. The poor guy looked embarrassed before he even opened the gate. "Mr. Elliot Mercer," he asked carefully while little Avery stared at him with frosting on her cheeks. "You've been served regarding civil damages and environmental misuse affecting neighboring properties." I took the envelope slowly, already feeling my stomach tighten. Celeste had timed it perfectly. Maximum humiliation. Maximum disruption. Inside was a lawsuit nearly 80 pages thick claiming my rainwater systems and irrigation setup were illegally redirecting groundwater from surrounding homes. Total nonsense. Scientifically impossible nonsense. But that's the thing about wealthy bullies. Facts are optional when you can afford lawyers. Lauren read over my shoulder and muttered, "You have got to be kidding me." Oh, but Celeste wasn't kidding. By the next morning, local Facebook groups were flooded with posts accusing me of draining wells and hoarding water during drought season. Somebody leaked drone photos of my property online with captions like "Selfish millionaire rancher destroys community resources." One woman actually commented that I should be forced out before I poison the valley. People believe crazy things when fear gets wrapped in moral outrage. And Celeste knew exactly how to weaponize that. A week later, I walked into the grocery store, and conversations literally stopped when I grabbed a shopping cart. Folks I'd waved to for months suddenly found the cereal aisle fascinating. One older man avoided eye contact so hard he nearly backed into canned soup. That was the moment I realized what Celeste was really building. Not lawsuits, not fines, isolation. She wanted the town to see me as an outsider before she destroyed me publicly. Problem was, she picked the wrong retired old man. See, most people spend enough years in federal court and end up cynical. I ended up observant. I knew patterns. I knew intimidation tactics. And most importantly, I knew corrupt people almost always get arrogant long before they get caught. So while Celeste was busy turning public opinion against me, I started digging. Quietly, patiently. The first crack appeared through county property records. Silver Peak Holdings had been buying land around Alder Creek through Shell LLCs for almost 2 years. Every parcel connected back to the same development attorneys in Boise. Then I noticed something even stranger. Celeste's real estate company had received consulting payments from one of those shell corporations. Large payments. Payments no small-town HOA president should have been receiving. I sat in my study one night, surrounded by paperwork, hearing my grandfather's old clock ticking against the wall while snow drifted outside the windows, and I remember thinking, there you are. There's the real story. It was never about regulations. It was never about aesthetics. They wanted my land because without it their luxury resort expansion collapsed. And Celeste, she wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was cashing in. I countersued 3 days later. Harassment, defamation, abuse of authority, illegal enforcement beyond HOA jurisdiction. My attorney nearly choked when I handed him a fully organized evidence binder color-coded better than most prosecutors' offices. Jesus, Elliot, he laughed nervously, flipping pages. You build this overnight? Old habits, I told him. Federal court either teaches you organization or alcoholism. The hearing happened 2 Tuesdays later in Missoula. Celeste arrived dressed like she was campaigning for governor, all polished smiles and fake concern, trailing behind a lawyer named Brent Sutter who charged $1,500 an hour and looked exactly like the kind of man who sends steak back at restaurant for sport. He walked into court expecting to dismantle some cranky retiree living in the woods. Then I started speaking. I watched the moment realization hit him. You can actually see it happen sometimes, the tiny flicker behind the eyes when someone suddenly understands they misjudged the room. Judge Holbrook asked a simple question about groundwater diversion, and Brent launched into this dramatic speech full of environmental panic and community damage. Then the judge turned toward me. Mr. Mercer? I stood slowly, calm, measured, the same way I'd stood thousands of times before. Your Honor, I said, the plaintiff's argument violates basic hydrology, county mapping records, and Colorado water separation doctrine established under Harris versus Montwell in 1998. Brent blinked hard. Celeste looked confused. I continued for almost 15 minutes without notes, walking through geological surveys, permit history, aquifer separation reports, and county zoning exemptions while Brent's confidence visibly leaked out of his body like air from a punctured tire. At one point, Judge Holbrook literally removed his glasses and stared at me before asking, Mr. Mercer, what exactly did you do before retirement? Tiny pause. Federal Judiciary, Your Honor. You could have heard a paperclip hit the floor. Celeste's entire face changed. Not dramatically, worse. Subtly. Like someone realizing too late they touched a live wire. The case got dismissed immediately. Legal fees awarded in my favor. Nearly $22,000. Brent didn't even look at Celeste while packing his briefcase. He just muttered under his breath. You never mentioned he was a federal judge. But the real explosion happened outside. I'd barely reached my truck when Celeste stormed across the courthouse parking lot looking like rage itself, had learned how to wear designer sunglasses. You think this changes anything? She snapped. You think because you wore a robe, once people are going to worship you? I leaned against my truck door, quietly watching her unravel. No, I said calmly, but I do think you're panicking. That landed harder than yelling ever could have. Her jaw tightened so fast, I thought she might crack a tooth. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Elliot. Now that part made me smile a little, because the truth was she had no idea who she was dealing with either. 2 days later, my electricity got cut during a supposed emergency utility inspection. Then my mailbox disappeared. Then county crews blocked the access road to my property for nearly a week with fake repair work nobody could explain. One night, I walked outside after hearing noises near the barn and caught 2 men photographing my solar setup before speeding off in an unmarked truck. The pressure kept building. Relentless. Constant. Like they were trying to exhaust me emotionally before destroying me financially. But they made one critical mistake. They pushed too hard, because eventually people stop feeling intimidated and start getting angry. And the moment everything truly changed happened because of a 74-year-old retired librarian named Evelyn Pike and 3 cardboard boxes full of HOA records nobody was ever supposed to see. Evelyn Pike smelled like old books and peppermint tea, and she showed up on my porch carrying 3 weathered banker boxes like she was delivering state secrets during wartime. I think these belong to you now, she said softly. Snow was falling behind her in slow, lazy spirals, the kind that usually make mountain towns feel peaceful, but there wasn't anything peaceful about the look in her eyes. I carried the boxes inside, set them on the dining table, and spent the next 4 hours uncovering the ugliest corruption scheme I'd seen since sentencing a state senator for racketeering back in 2011. Evelyn had been the HOA secretary before Celeste forced her out. Quiet woman, sharp memory, the type people underestimate because she speaks gently. But for almost 2 years, she'd been quietly photocopying financial statements, meeting transcripts, email chains. Every dirty little thing Celeste thought nobody noticed. Turns out librarians make terrifying enemies when you lie to them long enough. By midnight, my entire kitchen table was covered in evidence. Fake contractor invoices, missing reserve funds, illegal fees, hidden payments routed through consulting firms tied directly to Silver Peak Holdings. One spreadsheet showed nearly $300,000 unaccounted for over 18 months. Another included handwritten notes from Celeste discussing accelerated pressure tactics against resistant homeowners. That phrase stuck in my head. Accelerated pressure tactics. Like human lives were just obstacles on a construction timeline. Then Evelyn handed me a flash drive. Listen to track 7. She whispered. I still remember the sound that recording made when I hit play. Celeste's voice came through crystal clear, clinking wine glasses somewhere in the background while she laughed with a man named Victor Dane, CEO of Silver Peak Holdings. Once Mercer folds, she said casually, the entire North Ridge opens up. We'll force the remaining holdouts out through compliance enforcement. Victor laughed. And if the old man keeps fighting? Tiny pause. Then Celeste said something I don't think I'll ever forget. Everybody breaks eventually. Financially, emotionally, or physically. The room went dead silent after that recording ended. Even the furnace clicking in the background sounded louder somehow. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling while years of courtroom instinct started lining pieces together automatically. Extortion, fraud, conspiracy, coordinated harassment. Suddenly, this wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This was organized criminal behavior, hiding behind landscaping rules and HOA bylaws. And honestly, that realization scared me more than I expected. Because once people start treating human beings like expendable obstacles, there's no telling how far they'll go. The next week became war. Quiet war, but we're all the same. I contacted former colleagues from Denver, including an FBI investigator named Nate Hollowell, who once helped me dismantle a bribery ring involving county commissioners. Nate flew out personally after reviewing the files. He walked through my kitchen at 2 in the morning holding Evelyn's documents and finally muttered, "Holy hell, Elliot, these idiots built a federal indictment," and filed it alphabetically. Meanwhile, the town started shifting. Slowly at first, then all at once. People who'd avoided me for months suddenly stopped by the property pretending they needed eggs or fence advice just to quietly admit Celeste had targeted them too. One couple had been fined repeatedly because their autistic son kept leaving bicycles in the driveway. An older widower nearly lost his house after HOA penalties stacked into foreclosure territory over roof shingles approved years earlier. Fear had kept everyone isolated. But once people realized they weren't alone anymore, the fear started turning into anger. Then came the fire. Funny thing is, by then, I'd already started suspecting something violent was coming. Nate intercepted enough calls and emails to know Celeste was unraveling financially. Silver Peak was threatening lawsuits. The FBI had quietly subpoenaed banking records. HOA board members were resigning. Her whole empire was collapsing in real time. Desperate people become dangerous people. That's just human history. The night my house burned, I wasn't even there. Nate insisted I stay with my daughter and Helena after an informant mentioned insurance solutions during a recorded conversation tied to Celeste's contractor network. Around 1:40 a.m., security cameras captured a pickup truck pulling onto my property. 2 men, gas cans, masks, professional accelerants. They moved fast too fast for amateurs. Flames swallowed the cabin within minutes. 20 years of journals. My wife's handwritten recipes. Old photographs. My grandfather's military letters. Gone. There's this myth people tell you after tragedy, that possessions don't matter, that memories survive anyway. That's nonsense. Some losses carve holes into you permanently. I stood beside the highway, overlook watching smoke rise through the trees, nearly 15 miles away, and for the first time since my wife died. I cried hard enough I couldn't breathe right. Celeste got arrested 48 hours later. Not because of the fire itself, because criminals like her always make one final stupid mistake. She called a local reporter, trying to imply I'd burned my own house down for sympathy and insurance money. Problem was, federal investigators already had surveillance, financial records, burner phone data, and testimony from one of the hired men who folded almost immediately after arrest. Turns out prison loses its appeal fast when you realize rich people won't save you. The final town hall meeting happened 3 months later inside Alder Creek High School gymnasium. Packed room. News cameras everywhere. Celeste sat beside her attorneys looking exhausted, brittle, smaller somehow. Funny how power evaporates once consequences finally enter the room. When they asked me to speak, I walked slowly to the podium and looked out over the crowd that once treated me like an enemy. For over a year, I said quietly, this community was taught to fear each other instead of questioning the people profiting from that fear. Nobody moved. Nobody even coughed. You want to know the most dangerous thing about corruption? I continued. It rarely arrives looking evil. Usually it arrives smiling, talking about safety, unity, standards, while quietly convincing decent people to surrender pieces of their humanity one compromise at a time. Celeste started crying before prosecutors even finished reading the charges. Conspiracy, fraud, extortion, guide fraude, arson solicitation. Victor Dane took a plea deal. Several county officials resigned. The HOA dissolved within 6 months. And me? I rebuilt the cabin. Smaller this time. Simpler too. There's a scar on the hillside where the old place burned, but honestly, maybe scars matter. Maybe they remind us what survival costs. Sometimes tourists still drive through Alder Creek asking where the judge from the HOA case lives. Most days I just wave from the porch and go back to drinking coffee while the mountains wake up around me. But every once in a while, usually late at night when the wind moves through the trees just right, I still think about how close this whole town came to destroying itself because a handful of people confuse control with community. So now I want to ask you something. If your neighborhood turned against you the way mine did, would you fight back or would you walk away before things got this ugly? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe ordinary people should never be bullied out of their homes by power-hungry organizations, hit subscribe. Because trust me, this kind of story happens a lot more than people think.